Hey everyone, it's Simone Watson, and today I would like to talk about using story structure as a pantser. So there's a lot of talk on AuthorTube. I mean, there's always been a lot of talk on AuthorTube about plotters and pantsers, and so the basic, idea is that plotters are people who outline their novels in advance, and pantsers are people who do not outline their novels. And then, sometimes we say things like plantser for someone that is some mix of both. Um, I have found recently I really love how Ellen Brock breaks things down because Ellen Brock uses the terms methodological pantser and intuitive pantser and methodological plotter and intuitive plotter. And I find this to be really interesting. And so Ellen says that if you pants with a story structure in mind, you may be more of a methodological pantser. So, me, I don't. Yes, I mean, Ellen also said that you don't have to be one or the other. You could be like kind of in the middle, or you could be kind of it's kind of a spectrum sort of, or two spectra. Is that the plural of spectrum? Not sure. So you could be more methodological than intuitive. You could be more pantser than plotter, but you could be kind of have a mix. You kind of have a mix. So for me, I think I'm usually kind of a methodological pantser, but there are times where I like to just do some intuitive pantsing. However, I recently had to write down, not had to, but I decided to write down the story structure that I use. And so I thought it might be helpful to other people, is like especially people who pants. But if you want to pants with a structure in mind, um, it might be helpful just to hear kind of how I think about story structure because I sort of accidentally made up a story structure. By accidentally, here's what I mean. I read the book How to Write a Screenplay by Mark Evan Schwartz back in high school. So I was about in 10th grade. That would have been in the year 2010. Um, and after reading that, I knew that there was a story structure that was mentioned in that. Now, I think there was a I think the amount of time spent on that story structure was kind of small. It was just like a one page. So the book How to Write a Screenplay is a screenplay about how to write a screenplay, but it's in a book. It's kind of funny, but it's written as a screenplay. And so they don't just explain a bunch of things. They kind of have a character say them through dialogue. And so this character who was saying what the beats of story were, this character said setup, inciting incident, decision, reaction, reversal, decision, reaction, da 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 da. So it was like all these kinds of things. And so I heard those things and then I like kind of remembered them, kind of threw them out the window when I started writing screenplays because you live and learn, you just live and learn. And so then years later, when I started writing novels, people were talking about Save the Cat. And because people were talking about Save the Cat in a particular way, I just assumed that Save the Cat's story structure, which was also kind of originally meant for screenplays, I assumed that the Save the Cat structure and the Schwartz structure were basically the same. Like they have pretty much the same stuff. They just call it by a different name, etc., etc. But it's been a long time since I read How to Write a Screenplay. I don't know where it is because that was when I was 15 and I am now almost 31. So I don't know where that book is. I haven't looked at that book in a long time, so I only kind of remember the beats, kind of, and I don't super remember the details. So I finally looked at Save the Cat, and I realized Save the Cat does not. The structure that I do, Save the Cat is not exactly it. So it's not exactly like Save the Cat. But what I did was I kind of combined some elements of Save the Cat with some elements of the Schwartz structure and some elements of like what K.M. Weiland talks about, and I just put them into this nice graphic that you probably cannot see because it is written on paper. I don't know. I don't know. Um, but what I want you to notice here is that there are colors. Okay? Now, you may have seen my video about the pendulum method of writing a query letter, right? And the pendulum method is also kind of based on the idea that like all the story structures are kind of the same, right? And then I realized later, no, they're really not all the same. But the pendulum method is based on the idea that there's a pendulum, a theoretical pendulum, okay? In your story, when something happens to your character, that is a pendulum swing toward your character. And when your character does something or makes a decision, that's a pendulum swing away from your character. So the idea behind the pendulum method of query writing is that you want to get about 4.5 good swings in your query letter. You want to get the inciting incident, what your character does about it, the first obstacle that your character, comes to, and then how your character responds to that obstacle, and then give a hint of like what danger is still on the horizon, like what things could still come up that would be bad. And that is the basics of the pendulum method. So I realized that if I'm pantsing, thinking about the story like a pendulum is also helpful for pantsing, because I think that if you want to think about story beats, it helps to realize which beats are something happening to your character and which beats are your character doing something. Now, the phrase your character doing something I know can be controversial to certain people, because some people are going to say my character doesn't have to be active all the time. My character doesn't have to be doing stuff all the time. I mean, yes. I think that sometimes there's some confusion over character agency, because people think that if someone tells you that your character needs agency, they mean your character needs to be kicking people in the face. Your character does not need to be kicking people in the face. Your character doesn't even need to necessarily go anywhere or necessarily physically do anything. Agency can be, I've decided I'm going to get over my ex, or I've decided I'm going to think differently, or I've decided I'm going to be nicer to my parents. Like, basically, agency is when your character makes decisions. I believe your character should make decisions in most Western stories. That's like pretty much the marker of the protagonist. I think that's what it seems like to me. I don't know. I'm not. Okay. I should have put this disclaimer at the beginning. I should have put this disclaimer at the beginning. This is not something that I have like studied for many. Like, I have studied it, but I have not like come to some level of being an expert or like having a PhD or something like that. So I don't want you to think that anything I'm saying is like, well, no, you have to do it exactly like this. Da, 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 da. I'm just kind of expressing what works for me, right? So what works for me is thinking of decisions and reactions. Decisions and reactions, decisions and reactions. And I think of my story in terms of 3 decisions. Okay? 3 decisions made by the main character. So this is how this works basically. I'm not going to tell you every single beat that I have on this thing because I have like 18 beats, but here's the basic thing. There's a setup. Okay? The character is in his or her normal world, right? There's an inciting incident, which is a thing that happens to the character. Then there's a first decision. Now, Schwartz did not use the term first decision. Schwartz just said decision, but I like to say first decision. This in some other structures they would call it by something different. I just like to call it the first decision because I don't know. Yeah. So after the inciting incident happens, your character's like, "Oh no, I have to do something." They do something. That's the first decision. Okay, they're going now. This plan might work for a little while, right? And so I have effects of first decision. This plan kind of works for a little while. We need to kind of see how things play out, but then the character hits an obstacle. Now, when your character hits an obstacle, this is just the way I do it, okay? When the character hits an obstacle, the character must make a second decision. I have tried to look in other story structures and see if they have something called a second decision. I didn't really see a lot about that. I saw the obstacle being named, either the obstacle was named a reversal or the obstacle was named a pinch point. One way you could think of it is that if it's a reversal, then the second decision will be, up, that plan didn't work. I got to try a different plan. But if it's a pinch point, the second decision will be, no, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to reapproach my original plan with renewed resolve. So that would be, so either one of those is a second decision. I would just say, for me, it needs to kind of feel decision-y. It needs to feel significant, if that makes sense. Um, and that's just the way I think about it. But then once the character has made the second decision, we can see also the effects of the second decision. So I guess now I am going through all of the beats, but it's okay. It's not a ton. Then we come to the midpoint. Lots of people have a midpoint in their story structures. Lots of people have different philosophies on what the midpoint should be, how the midpoint should work. I tend to think of it as a big change in whatever's going on. I don't have as many philosophical musings on the midpoint as some other people do. So for now, I'm just going to say there should be a big change in the stakes, right? Um, at the midpoint. Now, after the midpoint, we get to the third quarter of the book, which for me has alternately been either the easiest or the hardest part of the book to write, especially as a pantser. So this is what's really funny. So I will tell you what I have done. Usually, or at least in my first couple of books, what I did was I wrote the beginning part of the inciting incident, and then I jumped to the midpoint because the midpoint was big and dramatic, and then I just allowed like cause and effect to happen coming from the midpoint. So that took us into what I called the downhill roll from the midpoint. So just, the effect of things going on from the midpoint. But then you go from the midpoint to the darkest moment. So it's going to be like a low point. Now in between the midpoint and the darkest moment, uh KM Wyland, I think, has mentioned this, and some other people have mentioned this, that you can put another pinch point, or that you perhaps should put another pinch point there so that your character's character arc can show progress. I'm still kind of trying to understand what this pinch point is, but I think it's like your character's making another decision that's a mini decision. But we're not going to call it the third decision because it's a smaller thing. It's not like the big thing. I don't know. I could be wrong. So please correct me if I'm getting something wrong about mischaracterizing how other people describe the pinch point. But you're gonna get to the darkest moments in the book. Like I said, for me, the third quarter has been the easiest of pants. I've done. This is what I've done on two of my books. I've written approximately the first quarter, then I skipped to the midpoint, wrote from the midpoint to the darkest moment, then I went back and wrote the second quarter of the book to see how to connect the first quarter and the third quarter. Then I went and finished the fourth quarter. But anyway, so the darkest moment happens. If you're pantsing and you're like, well, what should my darkest moment be? Just think about your conflict. Think about your central conflict. I should have mentioned at the beginning that you needed a central conflict. Think about your central conflict and think, how do I make it really, really bad? Like, really bad. Like, it looks like this is not going to happen. It looks like this is not going to work out. That could be your darkest moment. And especially if it's happening as a result of the events from the midpoint, that things are just going like, blah, 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 blah. Although someone might challenge that. That might not be right. It might not need to be a direct result of the midpoint. We'll see about that. But there's the darkest moment. Then you have what I call, and I made this up, I call it the 45 reversal. Now, I'm sorry. I didn't make up the beat, the 45 reversal. I just made up a name for it because I didn't see anyone calling it out as its own beat. So what is the 45 reversal? The 45 reversal is in the TV show Monk or the TV show House or any TV show where people are solving a mystery, where you've gotten to the darkest moment where it looks like they're not going to solve the mystery, but then some clue or some hint or some seemingly innocuous thing happens that causes a light bulb to go off, and then your character goes, oh, I got it. I've solved the mystery. So the 45 reversal is whatever that thing is that catalyzes the solving of the mystery or that catalyzes the third decision. Now, the third decision is the beat right after the 45 reversal. So you might be like, Simone, why do you call it the 45 reversal? I call it the 45 reversal because my thought process is that the character is going in the wrong direction. They're in the darkest moment, so they're going the wrong direction, and they need to turn around and go in the right direction. But if you have something happen that forces them to go in the right direction, that would be Deus Ex Machina. So you don't need something to completely turn them around. You just need something to nudge them 45 degrees, and then they take the initiative. And when they take the initiative and make that decision, they turn all the way around. They turn a 180 basically, but that thing just had to nudge them a little bit, right? So as mentioned, this could be, oh, I've seen the clue that's going to help me solve the mystery. It could also be like, if it's a romance, the character sees or hears something that causes them to go, you know what? I really don't want to give up on this relationship. I want to go and get that person back, or anything else that causes them to go, oh, I know what to do to solve my problem now. So then they have the third decision. And the third decision is the right decision. This is the one where they're going to actually end up solving the problem, right? So third decision happens. Then we see kind of an effect of the third decision. So whatever you need to do to get to the climax. And then there's the climax, right? So the climax, I guess, is like when the danger kind of reaches a high point, kind of reaches a dramatic peak, if you will. Um, then you need a resolution and then a denouement. Okay? So this is a basic rundown of the three decisions framework that I think might work if you are writing a story, because I mean if you're pantsing a story, because you're like, I don't really know what's gonna happen at this part, but I know that my character needs to make another decision. Oh, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I know my character needs to hit an obstacle right here. Et cetera, et cetera. Um, I'm a little bit nervous about putting out this video because I know that people have their strong feelings and thoughts about story structure. And in addition, it would be better if I made a graphic for this because you could see it better than if you're just seeing it on paper. But I made different colors so that we could see which ones are your character doing something and which ones are something happening. Oh, yes, but I also put after denouement. So after on mine, we have resolution, we have denouement. I also put an optional final twist. So you can put a final twist in your story if you just want to leave the reader with like a, oh, what? You could do that. But yeah, I don't really have a name for this story structure that I kind of accidentally made up. And when I say I made it up, I don't mean that it can't be similar to anyone else's story structure. I definitely was inspired by other people. So if you have a suggested name for it, please let me know. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if you would prefer to see this in a visual form, like in a graphic, please let me know. Or if you would prefer for me to give an example, like this character is gonna do this, and then etc. So thank you so much and for watching, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye.